Is trust and loyalty truly that rare in politics? And if yes, why?
Well, do you know, I saw David this weekend, actually, and we also had dinner a couple of weeks ago with Malcolm Turnbull, who had been the Prime Minister of Australia, who's a friend of both of ours. And he sent me a text afterwards. He sent me and David a text saying, what a privilege it was to dine with you, not because we've been friends for years or because you have held high office, but because you are both such good, warm friends. And I can't think of any Australian Prime Minister and Treasurer who had a relationship like yours in office, let alone remain such good friends afterwards. And I think we were both really touched when we got that text message. And it was a very unusual friendship at the time, and it's even more unusual that it's been sustained. And I think at the core of it was a personal connection, obviously, and a personal warmth and interaction, but also a kind of political deal, which was never really stated, but understood, which was that I would not seek to get his job, dislodge him, kick him out, which is often what, by the way, chancellors are often the people who do dislodge prime ministers. Rishi Sunak resigned from Boris Johnson's government and brought him down, for example, or Nigel Lawson's resignation precipitated the downfall of Margaret Thatcher, and you've got the whole, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair thing. So I was never going to do that. So I was not a rival. But as a result, David entrusted me with a much wider remit over domestic policy, national security and stuff than normally a prime minister would, because he knew he had a right-hand person who he could completely rely on. And I ended up fulfilling some of the functions, this is not to take away from the people who did these actual jobs, of the chief of staff and the chief whip. And if you can create that in politics, it's unbelievably powerful. However, I think it's very hard to do. And so ever since our partnership, I've heard people say, I heard it when Sajid Javid and Boris Johnson were in Downing Street together. I've heard Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves say, we're going to recreate the Osborne Cameron thing. I don't think you can, because that was just a particular thing about us two and our friendship and that time in the political history.
The interesting question for me is whether it's desirable, whether in the end you can afford to have a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who are friends while doing the job. And, question mark, Gordon Brown didn't defer to Tony Blair on the issue of the euro in 2002-03. If you hadn't been friends, would you have challenged him harder when he said to David Cameron that he wanted a referendum in a way that you thought was not a good idea? Did you, in the end, I wouldn't have been in
the room when that decision was taken.
Well, it would be very hard for the Prime Minister to call a referendum without the support of the Chancellor.
The actual decision. And we could definitely discuss that at great length.
It's a different thing. It's a different thing. But
it is interesting, because I honestly don't think if I'd resigned it would have made any difference, because the cabinet wanted the referendum and the Conservative Party. Well, no, but I think in the end, in the end, it was because we had the friendship. It was, we'll work this out together.
I think we should.
But do you also think, just actually to come back to you have very strong friendships in politics. I think isn't it a kind of myth that, there are no friends in politics? I don't think it has to be like the relationship I have and had at the time with David Cameron. But I have, close political friends, and who we went through the kind of wars with. Yeah. And although they ended up being, in our case, actually by the referendum, a lot of the friendships were shattered by the referendum. The kind of Cameron clique was, split asunder by the referendum. Michael Gove being on the other side of the debate and Steve Hilton being on the other side of the debate and so on. But I still look back on my life and think some of my closest friendships were also political friendships.
I think that's right. But I think sustaining friendships through holding high office is hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard. Interestingly, two examples. While they were in the cabinet, Robin Cook and Gordon Brown didn't get on. They hadn't got on for a long time before that. And actually, after Robin Cook left Tony Blair's cabinet at the time of the Iraq War, they became very close, and not close for any political motive. They did, and kind of Gordon was very upset when Robin Cook died in an untimely way. But an even better example, I went down to see Dennis Healy at his house. I went down with Bill Keegan when I was Shadow Chancellor in the kind of early 2010s. Dennis was in his early 90s by this point, and I wanted to talk to him about history and to ask him about his relationship with Tony Benn, because Dennis Healy and Tony Benn had this kind of deeply fractured relationship during the whole build up to and the Michael Foot premiership. They both fought each other for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party. I mean, they were kind of at daggers drawn. And I wanted Dennis to tell me about his antagonism with Tony Benn. And Dennis said that when his wife Edna died, Tony Benn was the first person to contact him because Tony had lost his own wife quite recently, and he wanted to be there for Dennis. And Dennis was clearly deeply moved by this, and he wouldn't hear a word said against Dennis Healy. They were great friends. And I said, but for Dennis, back in the day, you were mortal enemies. He said, but that's just politics. I mean, Tony has been such a good friend to me. And it was interesting to see how, even when you have periods when there is those antagonism, things can come back together again. So I had some people who were good friends of mine and people who sustained friendship through my time in politics. But there's also some people where, for periods, it was very hard because structurally it was hard to be friends when you were dealing with things which were antagonistic. But there are people who are a bit like Dennis and Tony, who I'm friends with now and pleased and proud to be so. So, you don't always have to allow politics to get in the way of lasting friendship. And Dennis Healy and Tony Benn, they ended up very close in that. In kind of, I always think it's a quite touching story.
There's this is one of my favourite sort of things in politics. One of my favourite sayings in politics was about two other Labour cabinet ministers after the Second World War. This is Ernest Bevin, not Bevan, Ernest Bevin, who was the Foreign Secretary, and Herbert Morrison, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, and also, I think, grandfather of Peter Mandelson.
That's right.
And Ernest Bevin's told that Herbert Morrison is his own worst enemy, and Ernie Bevin replies, "Not while I'm alive, he ain't." So, right.
Look, we should leave.
We should talk about enmities in politics because that's
oh my God,
that's more interesting than friendships, isn't it?